video series. I want it to be an exhaustive video encyclopedia, in effect. And I called it The Complete Creation. Posted the first video on YouTube, which I was very frustrated with by the time I got it finished. And it became number 5 most discussed video on YouTube within 3 weeks. So it was really encouraging in that regard. And I know Dr. Scudder and Pastor Scudder had asked if I could come back and do a lecture series for Dayspring. And so I contacted them and said, look, I'm spending 30 to 50 hours for every half-hour session here. If I'm just going to reinvent the wheel, why don't we do it here and record it? So I really appreciate the kind camera crews and this church for hosting this event. And I'm going to start off where I started with the original video, and that is just, number one, what is creation and evolution, and who cares? I'm a very practically minded person, and even with Christianity, if your Christianity, where does your Christianity cause your rubber to meet the road? How does Christianity affect your life? If it doesn't affect your life, why are you a Christian? You see? So I want to start off with why it matters, okay? Now, first things first, creation and evolution is an attempt, they're both an attempt, to answer the 4 great questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? And where am I going? The 4 great questions of life. Now, evolution attempts to explain this without a creator God. I'm going to justify that statement later on because there are a number of people out there who believe that evolution can be fit into the Bible, that evolution can be fit into Christianity. I'm going to show you over the next several days why that's just simply impossible, why that's bad science and bad theology. Okay, it's horrible theology and horrible science. But most people don't stop to think about it, so we're going to cover that. Evolution claims that the universe and planets basically arose from a giant explosion, the Big Bang, some 20 billion years ago. What's a billion years among friends? It's around there, okay? The Earth cooled into a solid ball roughly 4.5 billion years ago. So you had this massive explosion. You had all this molten material floating around space that gradually compressed, cooled into a solid ball, which now became Earth. Life somehow came about from non-life. In other words, life came from a rock. Think of it that way. Via an unknown supernatural process. Now, I offended a whole pile of evolutionists by saying that, okay? Evolutionists believe in the supernatural. They just don't know it, okay? So again, I'm going to explain that why later when we get into the biology of it. And I'll show you there. I touched on that a little bit last night. It operates on genetic drift and mutations combined with natural selection to turn a few simple organisms into the diverse, complex life we see today. So the key points there, genetic drift, mutations, and natural selection. And, of course, this took many, many, many hundreds of millions of years. Evolution is a slow process. And that's where we're going to start today, those old ages. Now, creation, okay, is, of course, known by a number of names: scientific creation, biblical creation, creationism, special creation. It is based on the biblical account of creation, Genesis chapter 1 in the Bible. There are a number of creation myths, as they refer to them as, and we might touch on those a little throughout the series because they're kind of interesting. Myths usually have a basis in reality, and they've been warped throughout the years as it's been handed down generation to generation. It gets changed and modified. Vishnu, the fish god, for instance, we're going to touch on that, and I'm going to show you why I'm convinced that Vishnu, the fish god, was actually Noah, and that they actually made a religion after Noah, and I'll show you why later on. The creator God, whoever this creator God was, I believe it is the Lord Jesus Christ himself. I believe that is who the creator is, named by name in John. The creator God created the universe, the earth, and all life in a literal 6 days, roughly 6,000 years ago. Anybody know how we know it was about 6,000 years ago? Nobody wants to even try, eh? That's okay. You know all those long, boring genealogies throughout the scriptures that you got to wade through? Why do you think those are there? They're there for a reason. God does nothing by chance. They're there for a reason. It's so we know the history of the world. That's precisely why they're there. And, of course, this is key. You all know the story of Noah and the flood, and we're going to touch on that today. In fact, that's going to be the emphasis of this morning. if there has been a global flood, which according to the Bible happened about 4,500 years ago, we should see evidence for that. That's not a maybe. This is a flood that covered the entire planet. If it happened, the evidence will be there. So is there evidence for it? Oh yeah. Wait till we see it. Okay, now this is what creation science is not. I found I've had to clarify this because a lot of people think that creationism is a religion. Creationism is, for example, Christian science. I get that a lot. It's not Christian science. That was, I forget the name of the person who started that cult, I'll call it that, for lack of a better word. But it is not Christian science. It is not, as much as the media would like to promulgate it as, it is not religion versus science. On the contrary, science and the Bible interweave beautifully. And I hope to show you why over the next several days. It is, excuse me, I want to explain what I mean by this. I use the terms evolutionist and anti-creationist. The reason I do that is because the vast majority of evolutionists I've met and I know are wonderful people, good, honest people. They're not closed-minded. They're not stupid. They've just never heard of creation, and they've never heard the other side. And many of those people have attended my lectures. They loved it. They weren't offended at all. It's the anti-creationists. For instance, many atheists use evolution as an excuse. Atheism is their religion, but they can't have a God in their religion, so they have to come up with a way for how did we get here? And evolution is their lame excuse, frankly, to hate God. That's really what it boils down to. I speak by experience there, okay? So there's a difference between evolution and an evolutionist and an anti-creationist. I'm curious, how many people have heard of the Raelians? Nobody. Well, maybe you have to be from Canada to hear about them. They come from Montreal, of all places, figures. The Raelians are, excuse me, a religious group, if you will, in Montreal. You walk into their building and they have a gigantic DNA molecule because they believe that you were engineered here by aliens. And that's where we came from. Now, at first, that almost sounds like an impressive answer to the question, where did we come from? It's not. It's actually an intellectual cop-out. It only brings up the question, where'd the aliens come from? So it all boils down to one of two things. Either we evolved or we created. There is no third option. It rules out all other possibilities, exhausts all other possibilities. Intelligent design has been in the news a lot lately. Intelligent design, I'm going to go into very specific detail as to what it is. Contrary to what Judge Jones said in the Kitzmiller-Dover trial in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago, intelligent design is not creationism in disguise. That is nonsense. And I'm going to justify that statement later on and explain what intelligent design is and why it's important. Lastly, hopefully by the end of this course, your, I'll call it your discernment skills, will be just a touch better. And hopefully I can pass off a few lessons to you I've learned over the few years. The SETI project. Has anybody heard of the SETI project? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so a few of you have. Okay. The SETI project, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Now, this is quite humorous. A lot of hardcore atheists and anti-creationists run around saying intelligent design is not science and it's creationism in disguise. Intelligent design is a scientific tool. And they then turn around and use the scientific tool of intelligent design in their attempt to search for extraterrestrial intelligence by examining space signals coming in from outer space, looking for intelligence in those radio signals. It's hypocrisy. And atheism is just loaded with circular reasoning and hypocrisies like this, where you say it's unscientific on one hand, then turn it around in hopes to prove your case and use it for that. So that's the SETI project. I'll come to all that back later on. Okay, I touched on this last night. What is science? I'll repeat it just real quick. It's testable. That's important. It's testable. It is observable. It is repeatable. It is predictable. And it is falsifiable. I didn't get into too many big words with the kids last night, but I hear a lot of anti-creationists criticize creationists saying, oh, you're just discrediting evolution. Where's your evidence for creation? that shows a misunderstanding of how science works. Science is based primarily on falsifiability. Usually you cannot prove something, you can only disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, it must be true. That is basically one of the main principles of science. So usually, if we're falsifying evolution, we are actually also presenting an argument for creation. The two usually happen at the same time. Okay? If creation is true, we should find life suddenly appearing in the fossil record. If evolution is true, we should find simple to complex life forms gradually appearing from bottom to top throughout the fossil record, and we should find no out-of-place fossils. In other words, we should not find dinosaurs and humans together, because dinosaurs were supposed to have been extinct 60 million years before people ever evolved. So we should not find any evidence that the two ever lived together. As an example, we should find evidence that the earth and the universe is young. Because according to the scriptures, it was all created a mere 6,000 years ago, give or take. Now, just to throw this in, I know that the Seventh-day Adventists believe that the earth and most of the universe is long, but that the cosmos themselves are very old. Okay, I'm not real clear, but I know they have a little bit of a slightly different perspective there. If evolution is true, we should see evidence that the earth and universe are old. We should see, now this is key, I mentioned this last night. In Genesis chapter 1, 10 times in the first chapter of Genesis, it says God reproduced things after their kind, and things reproduced after their kind. So, if creation is true, we should see things reproducing after their kind. If evolution is true, we should see things changing over time. See the difference there? So these are key evidence, key pieces of evidence. If there's been a global flood, no two ways about it, there should be evidence for it. With creation and evolution, no matter what you believe, both ends are scary, okay? If you believe in evolution, you're dead, you're dead. That's not very fun. If creation is true and there's a God and there's an accountability, if we evolved, well, you got nothing to worry about. You can make fun of me all you want after I'm dead. I'll be too busy fertilizing dandelions. I really won't care. But I assure you, I'm very confident that I'm right. And even if I'm wrong, I got nothing to lose. Bottom line, nothing to lose. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. We're going to take a look at the evidence here, and what I wanted to start off with was the history. Where did this debate start? Like, how did this all come about? Does anybody want to take a stab? Where do you think the creation-evolution debate started? Anybody want to take a try? You're all smart enough to know that maybe you don't know. Okay, that's fine, because it's surprising. Believe it or not, it did not start with Darwin. And where it started is very key in understanding, well, the whole debate. It started with what we call uniformitarian geology, the rocks. That's where it started all. It is what I would call, or has been, the most effective weapon that has ever been launched against the Bible, the Word of God. Uniformitarian geology has been the most effective weapon ever launched against this. Think about this for a second. Did burning the Bible make it go away? No, it only made it go farther and wider. Did killing off anybody who dared to believe in it make it go away? Nope. Only made the Christian believers stronger. Did burning it make it go away? And banning it? Nope. Just made people want it all the more. A banned book? Oh, that's the best advertising for a book. Especially a book like this. But today, when you talk about this book as a literal history book, understand that. This is a history book of the universe and the world and life as we know it. If it's true, this is a history book. It's not just a theology book, it's a history book. And today, when you talk about this book as a literal history book, what's the first thing that people say? Oh, the earth is billions of years old. That silly book says it's only 6,000 years old. Clearly it's wrong. Did you notice that? This is where it all started. It all basically started with one man. Now, I want to introduce you to three guys. You'll probably recognize their names right off the bat. Luther, Finney, and Calvin. Recognize those names? Great theologians. All three men of fine Christian upstanding, and they stood up for their beliefs and profoundly impacted the history and the course of the world. All three men were trained in the same profession. Does anybody know what they were trained as? No guesses? Yes? Nope. That's what everybody thinks, theology. That's what I thought. You got it. All three were trained as lawyers. It wasn't theology. They learned how to argue. And so, as much as we disdain lawyers, I'm starting to have a little more respect for them nowadays. Because I want to introduce you to a fourth man, again, a lawyer, Sir Charles Lyell. Also trained as a lawyer, also profoundly impacted the world, I would say for the worse. And here's how he did it. He was a lawyer, not a geologist, but he is now known as one of the founding fathers of the modern science of geology. That's kind of bizarre. How did he wind up doing that? Well, he's the one who actually coined the phrase, the present is the key to the past. And you may not have heard that phrase before. I'm curious if anybody has. One, two. Yeah, all the older folks. Oh, we got some younger people too. Okay. He coined the phrase, the present is the key to the past. That is a loaded statement. Has anybody seen a global flood recently? No? So the present is the key to the past. That means, in effect, what are you saying? There has been no global flood in the past. Did you catch that? Very, very subtle. Very subtle. But he's a lawyer. That was his tactic. It was a subtle argument. Instead, I would argue, number one, the present cannot be the key to the past. It can't be the key to the past. I'm going to show you evidence why the present can't be the key to the past. I would also argue, and this is from my good friend, Professor Emmy Clark, I would argue instead the Bible is the key to the past. The Bible can be the key to the past, and I'm firmly convinced it is. I'm going to show you why. Let's start off with some kind of dark secrets that Lyell had. We would not have known what Lyell's intentions were, except that after he died, his sister published his private letters and correspondence. And in one of his letters, he wrote to a friend, I had conceived of the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the Mosaic chronology could be set down without giving offense, it would be done in an historical sketch. Let me translate that for you. I came up with the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the history according to Moses, the Bible, could be discredited without offending its believers, I would do it by making up my own history. Did you follow that at all? Let me repeat that. I came up with the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever I was to discredit the history according to Moses, I would do it by making up my own history. So we would not have known his intentions. This had nothing to do with science. This had everything to do with one man's religious motivation to discredit this book. And so he spent his life going around the world trying to find evidence to back up his history that he created. And I believe the Apostle Peter actually prophesied Charles Lyell, specifically, and Charles Lyell's great delusion that would come on the end of the world. Specifically in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3, knowing this first, in the last days there will come scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, get this, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Get a load of this. The Apostle Peter said that in the last days, scoffers would come saying, all things continue as they were since the beginning of creation. Gee, doesn't that sound an awful lot like the present is the key to the past? Do you see the connection here? And Lyell willingly was ignorant of the global flood. He was trying to discredit the history according to Moses, specifically on the grounds of the global flood. I believe the Apostle Peter actually prophesied Sir Charles Lyell and his great deception that would come in the end of the days. Now, anybody know where that is?
Niagara Falls? This is actually Niagara Falls. The reason I have it up there, this is where Charles Lyell, one of the places Charles Lyell visited in an attempt to back up his history. Now, what I find really ironic, a lot of anti-creationists run around criticizing us creationists, saying, oh, you're operating in pseudoscience. You've gone looking for the evidence to back up what you want to believe. Isn't it ironic that that is precisely what Charles Lyell did? So the foundations of geology and the foundations of almost all of the supposed evidence for evolution are founded in their very definition of pseudoscience. Evolution is a pseudoscience. Now, Charles Lyell went to Niagara Falls, and he must have been fascinated by what sure looked to be a really good clock, a geologic clock. When he got there, this is roughly where the falls were, that red dotted line. So basically, if you go to the falls, the water is going over the falls, and if you're looking behind, you can actually see that it's eroding out a scour in behind the falls. The reason that is because the hard top is limestone, very tough rock. Beneath that is a softer shale. So the water coming down splashes up, erodes out the shale. You wind up with a cavern in behind, and the falls collapse. And then it erodes that rock away. And so what happens is your falls slowly crawl backward every single year. While Lyell was there, he asked a local resident, he said, how fast are those falls receding? You'll notice that he did not go out and systematically measure the recession rates, as any good scientist would. He asked a local resident. The local resident said, well, I've been eyeballing it between this tree on this side and a tree on the far side, and I would say it's eroding about 3 feet per year. So, did Lyell go and measure it? Nope. Did he use the local resident's ballpark guess? Nope. Instead, what he wrote in his book, Principles of Geology, he assumed the local was exaggerating, and he assumed that the erosion rates were actually 1 foot per year. And so, get a load of this, in his book, what he wrote was Niagara Falls is receding at 1 foot per year. It is 35,000 feet long. Therefore, the gorge is 35,000 years old, and the earth cannot be 6,000 years old. He never once mentioned the Bible. Keeping in line with his tactic that he would not offend its believers, he made up his own history. Everyone who read his book, Principles of Geology, concluded that this book was fiction. It profoundly impacted the world. And guess which one of those people, the name of one of those people who got a load of his book? Sir Charles Darwin. Got a hold of his book, Principles of Geology, read it on his voyage in the Beagle, and suddenly Darwin had his old Earth in which to place his evolutionary theory. So, did Lyell's science stack up to scrutiny? Or should I say his fiction? No, absolutely not. Last year, I got a call I called a good friend of mine, Ian Taylor, in Ontario. He's the author of the book In the Minds of Men, which is just coming out with a new edition right now. It should be printed in a week or so. If you get a chance, get a copy. It's a phenomenal book. Heavy read. It's like that thick. It's like 550 pages. But it is just a phenomenal book. Phenomenal book. Very, very well done. I called Ian, and he was quite excited. He said, I was just going to call you. The reason he was excited was because this drawing, the first ever drawing of Niagara Falls, had just been printed in the paper that day. And so he faxed me a copy. I was in Ohio at the time. So I looked at the drawing, and I don't know about you, but it took me a minute to get my head wrapped around this drawing. I'm looking at it going, what on earth? Well, here's how it works. There's Goat Island. This is the American Falls. This is the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. We are on the New York side. That's where the drawing was made from. Now, I went down there with the goal of seeing if I could figure out where this drawing was made from. Within 15 minutes of getting there, the answer became obvious. It was instantly obvious where the drawing was made from, and the Knights of Columbus beat me to it. In 1910, the Knights of Columbus placed that monument right there at Hennepin View. Why did Knights of Columbus and myself both come to the exact same conclusion? This is where Hennepin made his drawing from. Well, it's simple. There's major landmarks in the drawing that are still there today. For example, this is Prospect Point. This is, notice the curve in the river with a major outcrop just before a major landing. That major landing is where the Maid of the Mist launches from today. So if you go and look for yourself. The drawing is right there on display. You can stand on the shores of the Niagara Gorge and look at the evidence for yourself. Here's Prospect Point. Now that collapsed in the 50s. It's been reconstructed, but that is essentially what it looked like. Over on the Canadian side, we're now on the Canadian side looking north down the river. There's the curve in the river, there's the outcrop of rock, and there's the landing which Maid of the Mist launches from. It's the only landing in the whole area. It's obvious where the drawing was made from. Now, when you visit there, they have drawings like this, and they claim Hennepin's Hennepin's Falls are way back here. They assume that Hennepin was exaggerating or drawing by memory. Can't be. It's too accurate. Instead, I would place Hennepin's drawing as having the falls way over here. Now, here's an aerial view. Here's where I place the falls during Hennepin's time. Here's where the falls are currently. So if we do the math, and remembering that in the past 50 years there has been essentially no erosion of the gorge, because they've put all kinds of water around the falls for hydroelectric projects, they've also deliberately reinforced the gorge so it won't erode anymore. Okay, they're trying to keep it from collapsing. So the past 50 years there has been essentially no erosion, is what I'm saying. In 270 years, the erosion has been an average, if my assumptions of Hennepin's drawing are correct, an average erosion of 12 feet per year. Was Lyell's number of 1 foot per year accurate? Hardly. Even today, before they built the hydroelectric projects, they measured the erosion rates, and it was 5 feet per year. Even that brings it well within the time frame of the 4,500 years of Noah's flood. Lyell's work was fiction, yet everybody who read Lyell's book thought it was the Bible that was fiction. It was a great deception.